as an organization coming from the HR space, we also need to deliberately create opportunities for the Gen X to be interacting, engaging with the Gen Ys or the Gen Zs. Only then they can understand them better. And I think there's two things, two key critical competencies that you need to have to be successful as a manager, whether you're Gen X or any level. One is empathy, putting yourself in other people's shoes. Second thing is adaptability. If people want this way, can you adapt? Can you pivot to make sure you address and understand their needs?
Welcome to the HR Impact Show, where we have honest conversations with people leaders about building great workplaces. My name is Dorothy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Engage Rocket, and I'm your host on this show. Engage Rocket is a HR technology and advisory company that leverages on data to help improve employee experience from hire to retire. Today, we're joined by Effin Jamalludin. He is the head of people and organizational development at Singlife, where he leads recruitment, L&D, organizational development, as well as system economics. We're excited to delve into experience and his insights in leading multi-generational workforces, as well as leadership development. Welcome to the show, Effin. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us. For those of our audience who may not know you well, you have such an interesting background. So tell us more about how you got started and what got you to where you are today.
My career's taken a bit of an interesting journey. A long, long time ago, I started off my career as a psychologist in prison. So not recognizing you is a good thing. If I recognize you, we have to have a different conversation. Anyway, I used to oversee the adult violence team, which means anyone who came in with any high-risk violent crimes, whether it's murder, a gang-related offense, they would see me and my team either for assessments, counseling, psychological intervention. One day, this is about 4 years later, I thought, I've worked with the toughest of the toughest. Yeah, these guys are murderous, right? How hard could it be to work with corporate folks? And then I made that switch from doing clinical work in the prisons into the corporate side, started off in consulting. Fast forward till today, I still think it is a lot harder to work with corporate people, like my colleagues, like myself, like you, than it is working with inmates. It's I always joke, but I've stuck with it. So that's been my journey. Since I joined the corporate world, I've been lucky enough to be working in the industrial organizational psychology space, the IO psychology space. I started as an analyst, right? But working with senior stakeholders, doing board succession, working with C-suites, working with board members, and I think it's given me a lot of breadth in terms of the work. But I was very, very conscious when I did consulting. It was really to get exposure to different industries, different levels of stakeholders, different countries, in fact. The plan was always to be working in-house, in industry. So when I got the opportunity, that's when I made that switch. Also because COVID came and business class flights you can't get anymore. Yeah, everything's done online, so the nice hotels are not there anymore. No, I joke about it, but I think the world of consulting has changed, and I think a lot of organizations tend to focus more in-house rather than on that consulting space. So that's my journey today. I head the talent and organization development sub-function in Singlife, which means I oversee things from your strategic talent attraction, your L&D, org development, as well as some systems and people innovations project.
It tickled me when you said that it's actually a lot harder in the corporate setting than it was back when you were working in the prison service. So what's the key difference, but also any similarities or learnings? Okay, let's not say similarities, but learnings that you have taken from your time in prison to then consulting and then into the corporate world.
First and foremost, my clients today get to go back home to their families after we have any sessions.
Clients being employees?
Yeah, stakeholders. Employees. Today it's more employees for Singlife. Of course, in prisons you can't, right? You have to go back to your cell back then. So that's the biggest difference. Also, the other difference is that when I was a prison psychologist, of course, there was less focus on the commercials, top line, bottom line. I think once you're in the corporate space, all these things matter. Those are the two biggest difference. But in terms of what's similar, I think the drive for results is still there. It may look different. The outcomes, the targets, the goals are different, but the drive for results is still there. The best practice, the need to implement best practices into whether it's a HR space or in prisons, the clinical intervention space, that's still there. But I think what's also key is stakeholder management. And back then, my stakeholders were different. You were dealing with, my clients were inmates. My clients were, of course, some of the prison officers, government agencies as well. You learn to deal with people of very diverse backgrounds with very diverse needs, and then you can translate that into people you're working today. Right? It's how do you build rapport? How do you try to understand their needs? How do you have conversations and discussions?
Just out of curiosity, what actually got you started even at prison service right from the very beginning? There must be something that called out to you to work in the prison setting as a psychologist.
I have always been fascinated by people. At a young age, I thought, you know what, I'm quite good with people. I understand people. People seem to like me a little. So it makes sense to move into psychology. That's when I moved to the clinical psychology space. It's really that fascination about understanding what makes people tick, as well as what influences people to want to do what they do, right? And that's why I became a clinical psychologist. And then now in the HR space, it's the same thing. It's the whole fascination with people, what motivates people. It's just in a very different setting. So that's why I decided to jump from psychology into the world of HR.
On the same thread, we know that you're also a certified strengths coach. I had a background back in Gallup. I was with Gallup for 5 years. Just curious to know, what is your top 5 strength and how do you use them in a daily setting today?
I should know this. I've been coaching for a number of years now, 6 actually. Let's see. Competition is first. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then it's strategic. Yeah, followed by the individualization and then relator. And the last, number 5, would be analytical.
And how do you use those strengths on a daily basis? Or how do you coach people to use their strengths on a daily basis?
I think the strength that you have, they are so powerful that they influence not just what you're good at, but your preferences, the kind of work you enjoy, the kind of environment that you enjoy being in. So when I coach them, I ask them to look at how your strengths could be utilized in a setting that maximizes your efforts. That when you go to work, you enjoy what you're doing and you're able to become a multiplier of results. Simply because CliftonStrengths principle is the more you focus on what you're good at, the more likely you become a multiplier of results. So that's how I normally coach the folks. Competition, for example. I'm extremely competitive, right? I used to do a lot of competitive sports when I was in school. You always want to be the best. Same thing in school, in university, academia, or even at work. You just want to be the best, either known for being the best, or if you can, there's some form of measures or metrics, you want to be the best there. So that's how it has propelled me or driven me, that desire to win. However, I also realized that strength can be a double-edged sword. I am very competitive, but sometimes I can be a sore loser. Yeah. So a strength when overused can become a derailer. So sometimes when I do coaching with folks on using the Clifton Strengths Finder, I also explore how this strength has contributed to some results that they're not as happy with. It's a useful tool. It helps you understand yourself better.
So I want to tap on your experience at Singlife. The population demographic or the employee demographic are mostly millennials, and you're actively also recruiting more and more Gen Zs. On Gauge Rocket, we recently launched our 2025 HR Outlook report. And within that report, one of the trends that we found is that while there's a lot of focus in the last few years on how do we better equip the Gen Zs, the strawberry generations, the millennials, we cannot neglect our leaders. And now what we recognize is that the Gen X generation is actually taking up more than 50% of our global leadership positions, which I believe it's probably the case
Yeah,
within
it's
Singlife.
still the case with us as well. So your stats actually reflective of what is in Singlife at the moment.
So want to understand from your experience, how can organization better prepare these generation of Gen X in managing a multi-diverse, multi-generational workforce?
I think first and foremost, the core of it here is to be effective leaders. The senior folks, the Gen Xers, as you mentioned, they need to be interested in wanting to understand the people they're leading. The whole top-down thing doesn't work anymore, simply because of the majority of your workforce today, and then 3 years from now will be your millennials. With all the Gen Z, call them this, I don't know whether they appreciate being called strawberry generation because they bruise easily. They'll be starting to come into the workforce as well. So you need to be interested in this. And I think when I say interested, as an organization coming from the HR space, We also need to deliberately create opportunities for the Gen X to be interacting, engaging with the Gen Ys or the Gen Zs. Only then they can understand them better. And I think there's two things. Two key critical competencies that you need to have to be successful as a manager, whether you're Gen X or any level. One is empathy, putting yourself in other people's shoes. Second thing is adaptability. If people want this way, can you adapt? Can you pivot to make sure you address and understand their needs? So a lot of organizations say, hey, you know what? I get my C-suite, my CEOs to do town halls. And you engage everyone else. That's just one person standing in front of the stage, speaking to all the employees. Half of them are going to be working from home anyway, because you don't have space anymore in today's context. That doesn't really build engagement or interaction. It's just a one-way communication. Your Q&A, how many people can actually partake in that Q&A? You have a time limit for that, right? So, okay, in Singlife, we have a mentorship program. For example, we have a high potential program for employees called STEP, the Singlife Talent Experience Program. And we also have a management associate program where people selected for this program, they get paired up with mentors who are in the leadership group, whether you are in the C-suite or the C-1. It allows for the engagement. Of course, from the mentee's perspective, you get to learn from your mentors who've been there, done that, can share that nugget of wisdom in terms of how you navigate the organization, navigate your role, or even your career. But then there's also this thing called a reverse mentorship. When you're a mentor to someone a lot younger than you are, different generation, you learn from them and you start understanding, hey, you know what, these people think very differently. It's a one-to-one setting, but it allows you to understand a bit more. And when you understand that person, you also start seeing maybe that's how people of this generation would think. You use them as an opportunity to better understand the bigger population. I can also give an example. I had two interns in the past. They're back in university now, Queenie and Sherilyn. One of their conversations sounded like this. BBG, you slayed the Prezi. You really ate. That does not make sense to me in any possible way at all, right?
That's hilarious. I'm sorry. It's so funny. Yeah.
And that's a real conversation.
What does that mean?
But for real, BBG is just like baby girl. They call that, they're comfortable calling that, right? Didn't make sense to me. And then Slate, then did really well. Her colleague, my team, one of the interns, did a presentation to the bigger HR leadership group. She did a good job, right? So it's just complimenting you. Slate, it means you did really well. Presentation. And then literally she did this, 8. 8 stands for great. I would not have realized that, right? When Queenie said that to Sherilyn, there's only one reply from Sherilyn. She said, bet. It means yes. Mic drop. I agree with you. Bet. It's interesting. I started getting very curious about how they think, what they did, and I actually got them to sit down every day, walk me through this Gen Z vocab, help me understand. This is a generation where they want everything being done quickly. It's reflected in the words they use when they communicate with one another as well. It's just efficient for them. Right? For us, it's just, my gosh, what is going on here? This is a different language. I know it's English, but it doesn't make sense at all.
I'm just curious because you have a clinical psychology background. Do you notice, is there any generalization we can call on the different generations? What are their barriers or motivators that you can pick out for each generation?
Oh, this is the time where I sit someone on the couch, I lie them down and tell me about your childhood. A lot of how we are in different generations is the things we are exposed to, the environment we were exposed to growing up. There's that nature element, but there's also that nurture element. If you look at the Gen Xers, they crave for stability. They value loyalty. Why? In the workplace, they were working in a time where some of them went through the economic financial crisis and they just wanted stability. They're willing to work long hours to do what it is that they expected to do. The expectation is you stay in a spot or in a role for many years. It's not even recognized that you're expected to do that. And then you have the millennials. They were in school during the financial crisis. They've seen their parents losing their jobs. Only the best get to keep their job. So they grew up having this mindset where I need to be the best, that competition element, that achievement element. And if you look at how they operate today, they're always in competition. They're always trying to be the best. In fact, Time magazine in 2014 labeled the millennials as the me generation. Yeah, and they called the millennials spoiled and narcissistic, but it's just how you were brought up, you were exposed to this, and then you move on to the strawberry generation, as we call them. They grew up in a world where instant gratification is what they've known all their lives. Nobody goes to the library anymore. We used to have a library card. You go to the library, you do research, you take a book, you loan it out. Now, they are from a generation that you Google everything. The answers come almost immediately. You want to go shopping? You click. Amazon Prime does it in a very short time. So they are so used to instant gratification and they get bored easily. They need to be constantly stimulated. These are people born into technology. So they pick up technology a lot faster. Now you start thinking in all the demographics. You have your Gen X's, millennials, and you have your Gen Zs. When one values loyalty and you have this group of people who are competitive, who want the best for themselves, and then another one who just change their minds once they lose interest in something. So the whole loyalty piece, staying in organizations for 3 to 5 years, you don't get a lot of that anymore. Look at any tech firms, when you look at their CVs, it's always 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, and then they move. The whole notion of you need to stay in a company 3 to 5 years no longer exists. So you need to learn to shed that. And then about the working late, working hard. You're expected to work long hours. For the millennials, if I can get something done in 5 hours, why do I need to stay past the 8, 9 hours I'm expected to? It adds no value to anyone. I'm fiddling my thumbs on my desk. Why am I doing that? So these are all points of tension for the different groups of people. Back to your question, to understand how our upbringing, the exposure culturally or economically, it shapes the way we think, it shapes how we expect others to behave. And when there is a mismatch between expectation and how another group behaves, you get that misalignment, you get that tension, and it causes a lot of misunderstandings.
I love your answer, and I'm bursting with questions. Back to the trend that we identified, which is how can we better support our Gen Xs to manage this multi-generational workforce? Noticing that this misunderstanding or this divide, this gap is getting bigger and bigger. How can we better either help our Gen X identify these early warning signs, or are there any practical strategies to help them bridge this divide? And my second question is, to your point, there was a time where 5 years, 6 years, very good, is seen as very good. Sometimes when I speak to recruiters, they actually prefer breadth than depth. So how do we counter? Because there is ROI to every single hire. If they don't stay for a certain amount of time, it's actually a loss to the company. So what retention strategies have you seen as practical or efficient in managing that as well?
A few questions there. The first thing you're asking is what strategies that organizations can have. It has to be both ways. I think you can't just expect the leaders in the group, the more experienced folks. It's not a one-way thing. Millennials also need to be interested. But onto your point, I think in this era, you also need to be more focused on outcomes. If I take a step back here, as leaders, you always need to understand your team members. If you're managing a team with diverse groups of people from different generation, you need to understand that each person is unique and they bring a different set of quality to the table. They also expected to be treated differently. However, if you're managing a massive team, you cannot be individualizing how you treat every single one. There needs to be a very clear team charter or a very clear set of expectation. Then you leave room for 10-20% to do a bit of that individualization. So that's one way. But what I've seen work before, you talk about how there's an ROI to recruitment and hires. I've worked for an organization before where you are measured on outcomes every 2 months. You're expected to deliver a specific goal. They used to use OKRs, outcome key results, every 2 months. Imagine this. In 1 year, how many by months do you have? 6 of them. That person has achieved 6 different significant goals over the 1 year. And this is very different when you have goals that stretches across one entire year. You achieve this number of goals across 12 months. Productivity wise, the person who has been in that company for a year may have achieved a lot more than someone who just has goals measured every 12 months. I've seen this work, but I've also seen the challenges of this. 2 months is sometimes not enough to deliver something significant enough. So I think organizations need to be a bit more understanding. You need to assess what kind of industry are you in. If you're in tech, where things move really quickly, maybe it makes sense. If you're in an organization that is maybe construction, it's a bit different. Things move at a very different pace. However, if you stop focusing on clock watching, you stop focusing on the need to deliver, rather you break it down into outcomes, key goals that we need to achieve within a very specific time, I think it'd be really helpful in terms of measuring ROI. ROI is just what is being achieved, return of investments, and that can measure in outcomes, impact that's being created by the individual, the employee, for the organization. If he or she achieves lots of different big significant goals in a shorter span of time, won't you be getting your ROI then?
Instead of focusing on the person staying for longer, what you're suggesting is actually setting clearer goals with more well-defined time frame, perhaps shorter, and maximizing that person's potential to hitting those outputs.
And if I was a recruiter, I'm moving away from looking at 3 years, 5 years. In a CV, people looking for achievements. Those are things that you should look out for when you're hiring someone, especially in this element where in startups, you need to move fast. You need to achieve goals really quickly. You cannot have someone who needs 1 year to deliver one thing. It doesn't work for you. You need people who are very agile, who move at speed. And if you see someone whose CV fits with what you are trying to achieve, why not? Startups, the 0 to 1 is different from the 1 to 3, different from the 3 to 5 in terms of your scale of operations. And when you are in a more established organization, why not hire someone who is very efficient in getting things done rather than, oh, he's been in the company for 5 years. But you could be in a place for 5 years and achieve nothing at all. You're just comfortable. You just don't really like change, and you go through day to day. Keep your head down. I do what I'm supposed to do. I don't challenge status quo. I don't rock the boat. If you want people to challenge how things are done, to get things to be moving faster, doing the same things over and over again does not get you a different set of results. If you want people to do transformation, then you need to hire people who are of that DNA. And the traditional goal setting looks at 6 months, 1 year. Mid-year review, end of year review. All right, you set your goals. And mid-year review is always a pulse check into whether you're on track or off track for the rest of the year. Which means like it's a long stretch for that one goal. You break it down, maybe not every bi-month, not 2 months, maybe every quarter, maybe in the 6 months mark. Then you can shorten the length of getting things done, achieving big things in a span of time that may be pushing or driving more results than just waiting for the traditional 1 year window for performance review.
I want to circle back to also something that you said just now about the managers needing to have empathy and needing to be interested to manage multi-generational workforce. How do you do that in Singlife in terms of either recruiting for these traits or skill sets within managers or developing them within the managers?
Ideally, you're recruiting for people who showcase these traits. And I think your interview process needs to be very robust. If you've worked with your executive search firms, your Korn Ferries, Heidrick and Strugels, Egon Zanders, Stuart Spencer's, they have a lot of very robust methodology from the earlier psychometric to competency-based interview to simulation activities to understand all these things. And when it comes to hiring, especially at the senior level, two things you look at: competencies. Track record is expected. I mean, you won't even get to the selection process if you don't have the track record. Competencies. What are the competencies that's necessary for the role? And then you look at what I call the agility piece, which probably looks at your empathy, adaptability, a bit more like a core competencies, values rather than functional competencies. So you hire for these people because then you're going to get leaders who show and demonstrate empathy and that ability to adapt really quickly. So that's one, hiring. Yeah, great. You already hired the kind of people that you want. Of course, sometimes you are building from within or developing from within. I'm not saying people don't have empathy, but some people are a lot more empathetic than others, a lot more adaptable than others are. You need to have programs in your organization that encourages this from a development perspective. This is where L&D come in. They come in to help with upskilling. Now, on the other side of things is you also need to make sure you can develop, but if people don't see Oh, we talk about empathy, we talk about adaptability, but so what? Right? Put it into formal mechanisms like your performance process. If you start measuring whether someone's showcasing empathy or that ability to adapt, then it sends a very clear message to the managers, the leaders, everyone in the organization that, hey, we take these two values or these competencies very seriously. You need to start developing it, or you are not going to be rewarded. Or it may be detrimental for you if you don't do this. The value of that, you get empathetic leaders who understand team members, who can leverage and get the best out of team members. You get leaders who are very adaptable, and that only works well for the organization. It has to be something that is taken seriously. You need to embed this within your culture, and culture is in the things we do, the things we see, how we go about our work in the organization. From the hiring process to the performance review process to the development process, I think all these things play a part in encouraging or inculcating the empathy as well as adaptability bit.
You are talking about peer reviews or 360 reviews as part of performance.
So organizations actually measure values. In Singlife, our values are ACID for short. It is agility, collaboration, empathy. You mentioned we have innovation and we have trust. Agility, similar to what we talked about, which is adaptability. How do you adapt, pivot to change? So we look at this as our values. We're very serious about it. It's the DNA of a Singlifer. So that's how you put it into your culture. But we also measure values as part of performance review. Does the individual showcase agility as defined by our behavioral descriptors or what agility is to us in Singlife? So that's how we actually make this real for Singlifers.
And also send a very clear message of how important this is. So I want to stay on this topic of leadership and tapping on your experience as a psychologist, as well as your experience in Korn Ferry. We talked about a lot of traits that we want to see in leaders, but what about red flags?
Basically, one of the things, if it doesn't align with the kind of values, your DNA as an organization, and you're in the interview process, selection process, these things come up, that's a red flag. But one of the more common ones is when I'm looking at hiring or selection, track record is very important. The results you've achieved in the past. For example, if you constantly in any organization you work for, your team members are leaving and there's a very high attrition rate in your team, that is a big red flag. What does it mean? It shows that maybe you are delivering results, but at what cost? And there is a cost to attrition in any organization. Can we afford hiring different team members for you every 6 months? So that's a big red flag. Second thing is, you have people who are just very good at interviewing. You need to start looking at, hey, this guy's talked a big game. CVs look very impressive. Let's check your reference checks. What exactly has the person achieved? Because reality based on results then backs up whatever they have talked about. So when you've talked a big game but you've done nothing, or you've not really seen through the result, you may have started it, but you don't see through whatever you've started. These are some of the red flags that we look for. When I ever do this, some of my colleagues who are still in the clinical space, or even some of my interns who do psychology will ask, oh, you did a lot of clinical work, psychology, you did assessments for different people, like psychopathy, for example. Do you look for all these things? It sometimes becomes all habits die hard, and you're so used to it. I am certified to assess for psychopathy, and there's a list of things like superficial charm, goodness of tongue, of course, track record for maybe being a bit manipulative, like lying, all these things come into play. I don't outrightly look for these things, but I do assess for such things when I assess people in the corporate world. Back to the point, are you delivering on whatever you've talked about? If you are, then it's not so much as you hyping yourself or bloating your achievements because you really have that track record for this. So these are probably some of the things that I look for in people.
You talked about the fact that to really send a message of how important values are, and you talked about empathy as one of your values, you do incorporate those behavioral statements as part of performance appraisal for regular reviews. So if knowing that how I rate someone actually affects the performance, how do you ensure that people are honest during these reviews?
You can never be sure if people are honest, but this is where you cannot just rely on a singular data point. You cannot just say, okay, manager, rate the employee, then that's done. Imagine this. If the manager is totally, yes, there's some objectivity, but there's also that subjectivity. I like this person, I enjoy working with this person, or I like him as a person in general. I want to keep the person. You put very glowing reviews for that person. And then the opposite can also hold true. Cannot stand this person. Very good at their jobs, delivering all the results, but I just want to get rid of them from the team. You're going to get really scathing reviews in their 360 or manager feedback because you only have one data point. So whenever you're doing a performance review, best in class would be you have multiple different data points. You have your manager review. If the person has a team members are expected to give the review as well. And then you have people they work with. This is the 360 approach. There has to be that professional partnership. So you need to assess as HR or as a manager, you need to go, are the feedback providers relevant to this person? And the other thing is anonymity, confidentiality. That creates a safe enough space for people to give real, authentic feedback to that person. And I think not all organizations have reached this level yet, simply because if you're not real in the feedback you're giving, when the person at the end of the day gets their performance review or gets all the feedback that's being given to them, they go, oh my gosh, I am a superstar. I just do exactly what I've been doing for the last 1 year and I'm set. But if the reality is not that, then you're not helping the person. You're not also helping yourself. If you're a team member and you do this to them and they go, oh my gosh, my manager is terrible, but I've said extremely amazing things about them. You're going to suffer. You bear that consequence. So I think that realization that feedback is valuable, it is important, it should be objective. That goes with training. And I think a cultural shift or a mindset shift, not always easy for a lot of organizations, but if they realize the value of it, maybe that switch might happen.
I love that. First of all, I love it also because even within Engage Rocket ourselves, we run value alignment assessments. We tested it out, including it as part of performance appraisal. But I think what I love most is that we also include this thing called a question section comment, where if you rate a 1 or you rate a 5, you actually can add a comment to justify why is it a 1 or 5. Because what I've also seen is that it might be true. If I give you a 1, it might actually, not because I don't like you, but it might actually be, I think you can improve in that area. And by allowing a comment, I think that also adds a lot of context to the quantitative score.
That's a good point. Your one and my one may be different, even though we've got very clear definitions of it. And that's why the calibration needs to happen. And that's why justification needs to come into play. If you're giving someone a 1, a 2, or a 4 or a 5, why is it this way? Because your 5 may be at a higher bar than my 5. Because at the end of the day, performance is about rewarding your employees fairly. If this person contributes this much and they really are a 5, and this one's actually more a 4 than a 5, the money's going to look different. So I think this is where calibration also happens, and you need to educate the employees during the performance review process. That head of performance reward in Singlife, he's very clear that if you don't justify, we will not give you that 5 or that 4. And then it sends a clear message that if you want to rate someone that way, I have to spend some time giving my justifications very objectively.
So, switching gears a little bit, and we asked this of all of our podcast guests. If you were to imagine the ideal workplace of the future, what would you say are some of the key traits of that workplace?
We talk about flexibility. COVID has accelerated the whole thing. Pre-COVID, you wouldn't even entertain the fact that we'll be working from home. In some organizations, you can be in Bali when your office is in Singapore, but you can still be effective and you can still be contributing. So a workplace needs to consider that flexibility to allow employees to be able to work in a space where it allows them to win at work and win with life. Because that's what employees are looking for now. In fact, when we go into graduate recruitment fairs, a lot of what the students ask us is, so what is your flexible work arrangement in the organization? So Workplace of the Future has to consider this because when your employees are mentally and physically 100% or that they're doing really well, it reflects in the quality of the work. So flexibility is one. You don't need everyone to be working in the same space, then don't. It's also cost efficient for organizations. You don't have to rent big office spaces. Yeah, you save on that. Second thing, engagement. Whether everyone's in the office or whether you're working from home, we have a 100% work from home policy. You need to put in place a lot of mechanisms that encourage engagement and interaction amongst different team members, people in the organization, because employees need to feel like they belong. Engagement creates that sense of belonging. And when you feel that you're part of the organization, are part of the organization's success and failure, it'll be surprising what they will do to make sure that they deliver their best because they know the organization will succeed if they contribute. So I think engagement becomes important. Last, technology. Technology cannot be the end outcome unless you're in the tech firm. Technology is an enabler to success of the various business. So technology needs to be very integrated with what the organization needs to deliver, the business goals, the different departmental KPIs. So I think a workplace of the future would be flexible working environment, engaged workforce through many different engagement activities and initiatives, as well as technology that enables, technology that accelerates results. So this for me are the three key things that I would hope a workplace of the future would look like.
Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a fun and easy part of the interview. I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. So, because you're a certified CliftonStrengths coach, I've got to ask, out of the 34 strengths, do you have a favorite and a least favorite?
I thought this is an easy question. That's not an easy question, yeah? Wow. The politically correct answer would say all of them are important, yeah, and I value all of them. But you know what? I'll go along with this. Okay, so the one that I value the most, wouldn't say favorite, but value the most would be achiever. Because when individuals are stronger on achiever, yeah, of course, all my Gallup coaches out there are gonna go, no, you can't do this, right? Strengths are different. You can get to the same goal with different strengths, but hear me out here. Achievers are very goal oriented. They know what they're aiming for, and there is a willingness to spend that extra hour after work, that weekend, or do what it takes to get to the goal. I value results. I value outcome driven, results driven leadership. So for me, it resonates most strongly with me. The other one, lesser favorite, wouldn't say least favorite. I think inclusiveness. Why? You've been in meetings or you get someone inviting every single one to the meeting and you go like, why? Why is he here? Why is that person there? If you're not adding value to the conversation, you don't have to invite them over. Oh, you know what? You don't want to hurt people's feelings. Wow, I'm really gonna get like some comments on this. I think that for me, it's good to be inclusive. You need people like that, but pushed too far, then is it objective? Why are you bringing people on board that shouldn't be there? So for me, that in certain instances doesn't work. Same with all the values, but these two are the ones that come to mind.
I have both in my top 10.
Oh.
Achievers in my top 5, higher than my inclusion. So that's good news for me. Okay, next question. What's one book you would recommend to all leaders to read?
So one book is Coaching for Performance. That's by Sir John. I forgot his last name, but it's in his 6th edition already. If you've got that many editions of a book, it must be really useful. Why it's good? Because it's a bit like a handbook for managers at any level, whether you are a first-time manager, you're a seasoned leader of an organization. They have a lot of insights or value that you can take away from reading them. So it's a very coaching based, hence the title Coaching Performance. That's one. But I'm going to throw another one here. The Art of Seduction. It's by Robert Greene. Greene looks at a lot of different leaders, whether you're looking about Benjamin Disraeli or you're looking at Sukarno, of how they engage people as leaders. So you get to learn different ways of influencing others. And a big part of leadership is about influencing. How are you standing in front of the room? How are you one-to-one? It's interesting because the way it's written, it's sexy. How they tell about the story of different leaders, and then they extract the different ways that different leaders charm their audiences, whether it's an entire nation or a small group of delegates. So I think those are the two books for me that is quite interesting. You should read it if you can.
And my final question would be, if there's one thing you wish employees understood more about HR, what would it be?
Only one thing. Okay. I think not everyone is a HR expert. I've worked within consulting or being in a internal HR role. A lot of colleagues, peers, they tell you, oh yeah, HR should do this, HR should do that. Good. Feedback is good, input is good and is valuable. But you also need to respect the experience and the expertise of the HR professional. They have had the track record and they know what they are doing. So sometimes also listen and try to understand. This is why your HR colleague or your HR leader has implemented this or has shared this specific, because they probably would have known how it contributes to the enterprise success. They also know if you don't do this is what's going to happen, right? Listen, respect where they're coming from, and also share your input, but don't take over, because not everyone is an expert in HR.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Effin. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, experience. I hope you enjoy yourself as well. And thank you very much for being on our show.
Great. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you found the conversation valuable, do like and subscribe to our podcasts on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast app. You can also learn more about the show and subscribe to our community at engagerocket.co/HR impact. I'll see you in the next episode.